The geography of the current conflict has shifted. Iranian strikes are no longer focused exclusively on military assets. They are targeting the physical foundation of the global economy, the energy infrastructure of the Gulf Cooperation Council. This is a direct hit on the world's life support. Qatar alone handles 20% of the global liquefied natural gas supply. When that infrastructure burns, it doesn't just affect a region, it halts the factories and shipping lanes that the modern world relies on for survival. This strategy extends to maritime choke points. By activating proxy blockades at these narrow corridors, the conflict can effectively isolate the Gulf from the rest of the planet, forcing energy-dependent nations like South Korea and Japan to choose between total economic collapse or direct military intervention. On the ground, the room for diplomacy has vanished. The recent assassination of pragmatic figures like Ali Larijani has removed the primary off-ramps for negotiation. Both sides are now pursuing maximalist objectives, seeking the total destruction of their opponent's capacity to function as a state. Viewing this as a regional border dispute ignores the broader pattern. This is a calculated attempt to dismantle the global economic order. To see why these nations are willing to risk everything, we have to look past the external war and examine the fractures inside them. Human behavior is governed by the law of proximity. In any conflict, the game closest to you, the one affecting your immediate survival, will always dictate your decisions more than a distant objective. This explains why both American political parties support the war for completely opposite reasons. Democrats see the economic fallout as a tool to make rivals unpopular. Republicans see wartime as necessary to invoke emergency powers and consolidate domestic control. Below the partisan surface, a structural war rages between two American elite factions. One is the legacy Wall Street establishment, relying on the global order. Both the financial and tech elites sit on massive private credit and AI bubbles. As the energy crisis chokes off capital, both will burst, leaving a single limited government bailout. Control of Washington determines which faction receives that bailout and survives. Before the first missile fired, Israel was paralyzed by internal conflict. Massive crowds demanded the government's removal, exposing a nation deeply divided against itself. This division is a conflict of two incompatible souls. Tel Aviv represents the secular, cosmopolitan ambition of a high-tech empire, prioritizing Western material progress. Jerusalem is the opposite, inward-looking, traditional, and theocratic. For this faction, the nation's value isn't GDP or tech, but absolute adherence to divine law. The religious zealots in Jerusalem view the secular world as the animal soul, a distraction of material pleasure that must be burned away. Within this theological framework, war's destruction is a form of purification. They believe stripping the nation of material comfort forces it to find God. This makes extreme government factions actively hostile to peace. To them, national suffering isn't a tragedy, but the condition required to trigger spiritual transformation. Iran is similarly split between two countries sharing a single border. One side is defined by strict rural clerics, the other by urban, educated nationalists seeing themselves as heirs to ancient Persian civilization. The pressure of total war is radicalizing both groups. Clerics lean into prophecies of a final apocalyptic war, while nationalists retreat into defensive Persian exceptionalism. These two visions of Iran are becoming entirely incompatible. This internal fracture is the likely source of the high-level intelligence breaches. Commanders in encrypted locations are eliminated with surgical precision, deaths that signal intelligence can't explain. These assassinations suggest domestic factions are leaking their own leaders' coordinates to foreign enemies. They use the external war to eliminate internal rivals, clearing a path to take absolute control. The law of proximity confirms the neighbor threatening your vision of the country is often viewed as more dangerous than the enemy across the border. As these domestic civil wars consume the participating nations, the global secular order is experiencing a systemic rupture. With the energy infrastructure of the Gulf under attack and the financial bubbles in the West beginning to pop, the rational economic assumptions of the last 70 years are failing. This points toward a generational economic depression. The era of cheap, globalized consumption is ending, replaced by a world where the flow of energy and goods is no longer guaranteed by international law or common interest. In this new reality, power will shift to the nationalist theocracies we see rising today. These are factions that view economic stability as secondary to their ideological goals, groups that are willing to sacrifice their own prosperity to fulfill a perceived divine or national mandate. While a depression causes immense suffering, it also starves the cycle of constant consumption that has dominated the last 2 decades. It removes the material distractions that have defined our daily lives. This loss may force a return to the things that cannot be bought: community, family, and shared purpose. Surviving the next decade requires recognizing that the old rules no longer apply, and that the real war is already happening inside our own borders.